All right, so this week is going to be Unit 7, so we have this week and next week. We will be hopefully covering chapters 10 and 11 today, and then chapter 12 on Wednesday. All of this here, surprisingly, is what you should have just learned in the previous class. But hey, I guess that's a good thing because now we get to go over that here together. So we're going to be learning about cardiorespiratory endurance here, and then for chapter 11, it's strength and flexibility. So anaerobic, essentially conditioning, and then your flexibility training. So broadly speaking, you have three forms of fitness. You have your aerobic fitness, you have your anaerobic fitness, and you have your flexibility. So those are really the big three in terms of categories of overall fitness development for you. What we want to see here is how that actually is going to impact your overall movement patterns and how really that cardiorespiratory system is developed over time. So the easiest way to think of this is that we get more endurance as we age. If you were to say if you were to take, like, let's say someone like Mason who's 18 months versus myself at 34, and you were to have us stand side by side and start running, who's going to theoretically fatigue first?
Mason.
Why?
Because he's younger than you.
Kind of, but why specifically? Why is his body going to fatigue quicker?
Is it because he has to try harder, I guess, to try and like catch up to you?
Yeah. So when you're at that, toddler, even pre-adolescent age, your endurance is going to be a lot less than adults for a number of reasons. First off, your mechanics aren't going to be typically as sound. So when you see Mason run, he'll run with more of like a waddling kind of gait as opposed to that straight back and forth to help conserve energy. He's also going to lack the using of his arms, so he's going to pretty much have more trunk rotation, which loses energy as you go. So that's going to be problematic for him as well. Shorter legs, remember his head is a lot bigger relative to his body than an adult's head is relative to their bodies. So with having a bigger head, shorter limbs, he is going to obviously need to take a lot more steps to equal, say, one of mine. But even if you were to balance that out where you made everything essentially the same for that, or you stratified for that, he's not going to be able to have the most amount or the best oxygen delivery system just because he has less overall of it. His lungs are a lot smaller than mine. And he also is going to have poor thermoregulation relative to me. If you, now granted, we live in Arizona, so, you step outside or you even look out a window and you start sweating kind of thing. But if you were in temperate conditions, like let's say we were in, like, say, the mid 70s kind of thing for temperature, and you took Mason outside and even had him start running around nonstop, he's going to hardly, if at all, sweat. And that's because children have a lot poorer thermoregulation. They don't sweat nearly as much. You kind of wake up one day and all of a sudden realize, oh, my armpits are all sweaty now, kind of thing. And that's because it takes quite a while for your body to start appropriate thermoregulation. This is why kids tend to overheat a lot quicker, because they don't sweat nearly as much. So it's very important to really monitor a child's time outside in the heat, even if it's not even that hot, because you don't want them to overheat kind of thing. Now, hopefully you all know the difference between anaerobic and aerobic. With anaerobic respiration, you are talking about doing shorter bouts at higher intensities with aerobic respiration, longer bouts, lower intensities. So talked about body size, oxygen delivery, this whole ability to metabolize fuel sources in the muscles. Your muscles as a child are not nearly as efficient as they are as an adult. Even if like you start, say, lifting weights as a young child, you're not going to get the same physiological response as you would as an adult. Females especially, because you're not only going to lack testosterone, but a prepubescent male or female both lacks testosterone, and they're not going to be able to convert nearly as much of that energy into muscle building or hypertrophy. You'll still see relative increases in muscle size and muscle strength, but it's not going to be nearly the same as a post-pubescent, either teenager or young adult. All this pretty self-explanatory. Children have less anaerobic power than adults. They're just smaller, pretty self-explanatory there. At what point, though, do you think kids catch up?
Maybe at like during or after puberty almost.
So what age would you say?
Like 12-ish.
12's probably a little young, a little bit on the young side. You're looking at round about those early teenage years, like 13, 14, 15, right when you hit that first growth spurt. That's when you really catch up in terms of your anaerobic power. For myself, I distinctly remember when I was 14 and I was like just wrestling with my dad for whatever reason. And he was trying to like do like kind of like a suplex move on me. And I distinctly remember being able to completely oppose him on that for like the first time ever. And that was where it really kicked into gear that, oh, wow, like I'm on a similar strength level as my dad. And I'm, 14 years old. That's why I get a little bit scared when I think about Mason, because, I have absolutely no doubts he is going to be considerably bigger than me. And what happens if he just gets pissed off at me one day and wants to just straight up cold cock me? A 14-year-old him is going to have a whole lot of power behind that, especially if he, connects on a punch. So while I don't think he's going to be doing that, hopefully not, it's still something that's kind of, a little bit in the back of my mind there. But once you get that first growth spurt, that's when really you start seeing a lot of equalizing out amongst anaerobic power. Now, yeah, you're not going to be nearly as strong as someone that's like, say, a well-trained adult. But for an average anaerobically trained adult, once you pass puberty, the child is going to be on a comparable scale to you. When you talk about absolute quantities, absolute is the total number. So this all is in direct relation to your size. So if I'm smaller than someone, they're going to possess more of virtually everything than me because they just have more of it. All right, anaerobic training in youth. This is something you should have gotten into a little bit more with, say, in the 260 class. But when you're doing any sort of training for a child, what do you think you should be doing as far as training them? And by training them here, I'm talking about like exercise.
I think when you're training a kid, it's more about like the fundamentals or the correct way to do certain workouts more than like how much weight they can lift or their strength.
Okay. Let me ask you this, Gabby. When did you first start, say, training, like exercising specifically for softball?
Oh, well, I don't really like to work out, so I never really lifted weights. I never like really lifted weights until college because I don't enjoy it. But as far as like practicing and stuff, it was probably about like 8 to 10 when I was really playing like more competitively and having a lot more of like the conditioning and not just like fundamentals.
Okay. And for the conditioning, what were you doing?
Like sprinting, push-ups, a lot of like core exercises, a lot of strength like lunges and squats for catching and um, just different things like that, like agility and stuff.
Sure. And how do you feel that worked out for you?
I think it did what it needed to. Like I don't think I was out of shape or I mean, sure it could have been stronger, but it was good enough.
Oh, I get it. Yeah. What were you not doing then, though, in terms of your training?
Um, I don't like I wasn't working really towards certain goals. Like if I went to the gym now, like it'd be like working towards different weights and then it was just like I have to do this because I want to play kind of a thing.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was getting at there. You're doing a lot more of your foundation-based movement type exercises versus, say, doing bicep curls and doing bench press and doing lat pull downs and all that. When you're a kid, now there's nothing wrong with doing weightlifting. I mean, there's nothing wrong with even doing Olympic weightlifting when you're a prepubescent kid, like doing power clean, snatch, clean and jerk, things like that. That's not a problem. The problem is when you add, like, say, too much weight to it, or you're not perfecting the motion or the movement before you add or increase weight. That's where you get to be problematic. But what you're telling me here is that you're doing things like, say, your squats, your lunges, your push-ups, your core training, all stuff that's essentially body weight based exercises. When you're doing body weight based exercises, you're doing two things for yourself. Number one is that you're going to involve much more of your core, just even from the nature of body weight exercises. When you think of any body weight exercise you do, you have to involve your core really for the most part, or you can't do it correctly. And you're also going to be adding much more proprioceptive ability for yourself. You're going to be able to better tell where your body's senses or where your body is positioned in space. All that helps you develop more of a actual functional movement relative to your sport of choice, for you yourself being softball there, and specifically being a catcher at softball. It's going to do you not that much good to do, like, say, heavy weightlifting, especially the younger you are, because it does present a higher chance of, say, building up muscle imbalances. You can be building or really doing things the wrong way, potentially leading to injury, things like that. So heavy weightlifting itself isn't the greatest. You want to be doing more body weight or foundational based exercises, because those are going to be the ones that do the most to translate not only for improving you in that sport of choice, but also giving you the most amount of improvement overall for how you actually can move your body and develop your overall motor ability. For the most part, any sort of exercise is going to help you develop gross motor skills. There's very few exercises that are actually going to focus on fine motor skills, and that's okay. So when you're talking about both aerobic and anaerobic training, and even flexibility training for that matter, you're speaking largely about your gross motor skill production. That's the big one, or the big thing you want to drill home here. And this is pretty self-explanatory. If you stop training, your peak and mean power are going to decrease. I mean, that happens to everybody. If you stop training, everything goes downhill. We talked about this here, loss of muscle mass. Remember, this is our sarcopenia. So when your muscle mass decreases and your strength decreases, that's sarcopenia. You start around age 30 experiencing that. So if you quit exercising like completely at around age 30, you're going to start getting about a 1% decrease in your overall muscle mass year over year. Not the best thing in the world to have happen. This here, when you hit about age 70, you're going to see that everything declines pretty considerably. Why do you think about age 70 is the time when everything goes like straight downhill? So when you retire, you know, why are you no longer able to hit your personal records, that kind of thing?
Is it because like your body is like before you hit 70, your body's already breaking down all your muscle tissues and all that stuff to get ready for like older aging. And so like when you hit the age 70, you really can't do as much as you were when you're like in your mid 50s. Just because like your muscle tissues and everything are all breaking down faster than they were before.
Not so much as that it's breaking down faster. You're correct with the breakdown. That does definitely happen. Primarily what you're seeing here is major changes to your endocrine system. So your hormones that typically are going to help support aerobic and anaerobic power are going to diminish. So like testosterone diminishes quite readily. Your growth hormone is virtually non-existent. All of that is going to decline considerably. And with that, you're also going to have a decrease in your thyroid hormone production. So your metabolism is going to decrease. When all that decreases, also your heart rate is going to decrease. Remember, your age predicted max heart rate is 220 minus age. So the older you get, the lower your max heart rate is. The lower your max heart rate, the lower your VO2 max is going to be. So you're going to see everything progressively go down from really a number of physiological and endocrine or hormonal based reasons. Now, you can kind of push some of this back a little bit with continued training, but you can't stop the inevitable. This is why, you know, you're not going to, you know, see people at, you know, elite level athleticism when they're in their 40s and 50s. Someone like Tom Brady and Drew Brees right now, who Drew Brees is 41, Tom Brady's 43, still playing at a very high caliber level in the NFL, they are anomalies. If you look historically on anyone who has played a position other than punter or kicker in the NFL past the age of 40, when you hit age 40, you pretty much crater in your performance. It's the same kind of thing when you're reaching about age 70, except you're talking about your overall just fitness levels. So this is also why maintaining at least a base amount of fitness is so important, because you're going to see these levels decline very rapidly the older you get. One phenomenon you'll see is that when you look at especially men who are in advanced age, like 80, 90 plus, and you hear them speak, their voice is going to become much more higher pitched. Why do you think that is?
Can you repeat that? I didn't get the last.
Yeah, when you're in advanced age, especially for men, like 80, 90 plus, your voice gets a lot higher or a lot higher pitched. Why is that?
Is it because they can't really hear themselves since they're getting older?
Well, no, it's just the pitch.
Then I'm not too sure.
Okay.
Does it have to do anything like with the hormones that?
Yeah. So there are two reasons why your voice sounds the way it does. One is the size of your larynx. So your larynx is going to grow or get longer, or your voice box is going to get longer and bigger as you age until you stop growing. That's why when you go through puberty or a growth spurt, your voice drops or your voice breaks. You'll hear the whole like squeaky voice kind of thing. That's from your larynx getting longer and you adjusting to that. So your voice is going to, or your pitch is going to decrease for everyone. You don't see anyone go through puberty or go through a growth spurt and their voice gets higher. It doesn't work that way. You know, why do you think Justin Bieber can't sing Baby Baby anymore, kind of thing? And the second is testosterone. The more testosterone you have, the deeper your voice goes. The greater the testosterone, the deeper the voice. As you age, obviously you're not growing any bigger. So your growing's done. So that whole thing is stopped. Your windpipe isn't going to, or your larynx isn't going to change much in terms of its size. So you're going to change your voice pitch by having a reduction in the amount of testosterone you have. So it's a phenomenon you see specifically with men. You don't really see it a whole lot with women, where their voices, or the pitch of their voice gets a lot higher when they get to advanced age because of a lack of testosterone. All right, anaerobic performance, 10 to 30 seconds long. If you talk about anaerobic endurance, you're talking about up to about 2 minutes. And for the most part, you know, a lot of this is really self-explanatory here. This bit on cardiac output. With cardiac output, remember cardiac output is going to be either CO or Q. And all that equals is stroke volume times heart rate. At rest, everyone's cardiac output is about 5 liters of oxygen per minute. So at rest. At rest, your stroke volume and heart rate are inversely proportional. If you're well-trained, if you're like a well-trained endurance athlete especially, your stroke volume is going to be really high, your heart rate is going to be really low, your cardiac output is still going to be about 5 liters. If you are a couch potato at rest, your stroke volume is going to be low, your heart rate is going to be high, still going to have an output of about 5 liters. The only time cardiac output changes is when you start doing stuff. So when you are actually doing anything aerobically, you're going to see your cardiac output improve over time. At rest, you want your heart rate to be as low as it can be. The lower your heart rate, the more efficient your heart is. So they call that, and by they I mean clinicians, researchers, anyone that writes a textbook, oh, why did I just forget the word? I just had it and I lost it. Oh my gosh. Okay, your cardiac efficiency. There we go. Okay, sorry. This says in theory that you should have a 100% emptying of your heart, specifically your left ventricle, when you are doing anything, but our hearts are only at best in the 60 to 70% efficiency range. But anyway, you want, again, your heart rate to be as low as it can be, your stroke volume to be as high as it can be. The more you have of stroke volume being high, and the more you have your heart rate being low, the more efficient you are overall. Better overall your heart is. Peak oxygen uptake, that's your VO2 max. Okay. All this here just really says that everything with children is smaller. That's about it. So children have much higher heart rates than do adults, both at rest and then in performance or with activity. If you've ever, have any of you ever seen an ultrasound done on a pregnant woman?
Say that again, please.
You ever seen an ultrasound done on someone who is pregnant?
Yeah, the baby's heart rate is super fast.
Super fast. Why?
Is it because they're, I don't know.
Well, think about the two components of cardiac output: stroke volume and heart rate. We know that with children in utero, that they have a very high heart rate. So why is that?
They have a higher heart rate because they are just developing, so their hearts aren't very big, and they're like strengthening them.
Yeah. So how big is a, an in utero baby's heart? Like that big, It's the size of roughly like a quarter kind of thing. Not very big when it comes to, say, stroke volume. The only way you can equal out your cardiac output with having a heart that small is to increase your heart rate. Real quick side note, I hope this isn't like offensive to anyone. I've read before that this is like some sort of, I don't know, like racist term or something, or racist thing to do. I'm hopefully not like offending anyone doing that. But yeah, I was just trying to show you the relative size of the heart. Anyway, that aside, smaller heart means to circulate blood effectively through the body, you need to have a much, much higher heart rate. Now, when you are still in the womb, you have the mother to help circulation for you. When you're out of it, you need to do it yourself. So because you have a very small stroke volume, you have to have a very high heart rate to make sure that you have better circulation. And you also have a lot lower hemoglobin, so that's kind of already a disadvantage. This is why when babies first come out, like when they're first delivered, they look kind of blue. It's because they have a low oxygen or low circulating oxygen concentration for themselves when they initially come out. That clears up, as they start breathing on their own. So remember, for gestation, 27 weeks is the number to remember, because at 27 weeks, a child can start breathing on their own. If you have to get like an emergency C-section prior to 27 weeks gestation, you have to have the child on a ventilator, because you cannot breathe on your own at that age. All right.
Sorry, I just had a quick question about like a baby on a ventilator. Because when you're on a ventilator, it can put like it's doing all the work for you initially. So how is it just like is it just giving their body time to continue to develop outside of utero? Because how will they become stronger from the ventilator, not weaker?
Yes, it's giving them time to develop more. And I get what you're saying with them getting weaker, because if you think of like an adult on a ventilator, you think of them being, in declining health, right? Like you hear about people who have COVID in the hospital who are on a ventilator, and only a very small percentage of them ever get off of a ventilator, because on the ventilator, as an adult, you are going to decline in health with that. When you're a newborn, especially a pre-27 week or a premature newborn, what you're doing when you're put on a ventilator is you take stress off the heart and you take the stress off the lungs. So you're allowing the growth or growing process to occur without undue stress on those. Imagine if you had, you know, say a car with only one speed, and you tried to just pedal to the metal, floor it. You know, what's going to happen eventually if you are doing that in first gear of your car?
It's just gonna fail. It's not gonna work as good anymore.
That's exactly what's happening pre-27 weeks. If you were even able to get the child to breathe on their own, the amount of strain that's going to put on the heart is going to cause it to fail, because you're trying to run a high-speed automobile or a high-speed body with an underdeveloped or a much smaller engine than what is needed to make that run.
Okay.
It'd be like if you try to run even your, you know, your phone on a Windows 95 operating system. It's going to freeze and never work because there's not enough power in that to allow your programming to work. So that's why ventilators are good for premature children. They're bad for adults for the most part.
So then why, like, if they're so bad for adults, then, I mean, I know that the virus is like spreading through the lungs. Sorry, this is so off topic, but
Right.
I'm just trying to understand, like, what is the point of putting all these people on ventilators? I mean, I know they don't know exactly what to do yet, but how is that helping them get better if it's making them weaker?
Because the alternative is death.
So they're just like prolonging their life.
Yeah. So you're using the ventilator to prolong life, and in the hopes that the body starts repairing itself against COVID. It's a last ditch effort kind of thing.
Gotcha. It's not really like saving anybody.
It's just really prolonging everything. If COVID really is more of a circulatory type virus where it's inhibiting delivery of oxygen to the rest of your body, then being on a ventilator can potentially help if your body starts recovering from that lack of oxygen uptake. But we're seeing that if you're on a ventilator, you know, you're in, the odds are not in your favor kind of thing.
Gotcha. Okay.
There is a drug called transodium chlorate. I want to say it's TSC is the abbreviation, but it's supposed to help with oxygen delivery. So they're doing some trials on it in, I think, like Romania or something. But if that works, then you're going to pretty much see that no one's going to die ever again from COVID. So yeah, that could be a pretty huge thing. This bit here, relationship between peak oxygen uptake and age. So purple, well, the lighter purple is girls, the more bluer-ish one is boys. Why do you think that men have a better VO2 max versus women? And also, why do you think that men have a higher overall floor to their VO2 max than women? And also pay attention to the years here. So this is from 0 to 20.
Is it because of puberty?
Yeah, what specifically about it?
Is it like the testosterone and all that?
Pretty much. So if you notice here, women will kind of gain on men early on because girls tend to go through puberty earlier than boys. So girls will get at least a comparable amount of, or their VO2 max is going to be comparable to men, or I should say boys, early on. But once boys hit puberty, they blow girls out of the water because of having such an increase in testosterone. When you see all this, it's no wonder why professional athletes use steroids, right? Because you think of anabolic steroids as being things to make your muscles bigger, make you stronger, all that good stuff. What you don't think about is, are there effects on your VO2 max, which are also to increase it. So this is why testosterone is such a differentiator in terms of performance, like athletic performance, because not only does it improve on your anaerobic power and anaerobic capacity, but improves on your aerobic capacity as well. And women just don't produce nearly as much. What's even worse is this here. This is saying, or this is taking weight into effect. So girls, as you age and as you get heavier, your VO2 max declines considerably, whereas men pretty much can stay consistent. Not at all fair, but that is what testosterone does for you. Why does this happen? This is actually something that happens that's not a result of testosterone. But why do you think our aerobic training gives us much bigger improvements after puberty? And this is for both boys and girls.
Is it because you learn how to control your breathing and stuff?
Yeah, a little bit. Not really, though. What's the main thing that happens to you during puberty?
No idea.
You get taller, right?
Yeah, for sure.
If you get taller, what's happening inside your body?
Everything is getting bigger and growing.
Yeah, everything else is getting bigger too. So as your heart and lungs increase in size, the more you train them, then the more improvements you're going to see. So your heart gets bigger, you have a higher amount of stroke volume, or higher stroke volume you can do. Your lungs get bigger, you have more lung capacity or vital capacity. You also are going to have better tidal volume, or the amount of air you can breathe in and out regularly. So when you start aerobically training after puberty, you're going to see the biggest improvements in your overall VO2 max. This is why also that, say, if you were like a track athlete, it's not the best thing to do that before you hit puberty. Aerobic endurance is going to be stifled until you hit puberty. Now, it's not to say you shouldn't be doing any sort of aerobic-based training, but you're not going to perform at your best until you hit puberty. All right, talked about all this already. And when we talk about, like, say, the training and stuff, we're not going to focus on that so much here, but that's going to be something that we get into when we get into 350 the next half or in the next term. So are you all taking 350 next term?
Yeah.
Okay, so that should be,
I believe so.
yeah, that should be a good one for us there.
Are you teaching that class or like the rest of our classes for the rest of the year?
Yeah, pretty much.
Cool.
Well, I'm teaching 190 and 350 next term. And then in the spring, I'll be teaching 300 and 225 for spring 1. And I'll be teaching 250, 310, and maybe 375 for spring 2.
Okay.
Okay, any questions on anything with the cardiovascular system, with anaerobic training? I mean, pretty much it just comes down to when your body gets bigger, training does more for you. That's pretty much what it says. The smaller you are, the weaker you are. So, surprise, surprise. Now, when you talk about, say, like post-pubescent children, teenagers, and even into young adults, the smaller you are, the stronger you are. And it's all a physics principle on your height to force production ratio or height to power ratio. If I am 7 foot tall and I have to do, let's say, a squat, the amount of distance I have to cover versus someone who's, say, 5 foot tall is so much greater that the increase in size and muscle mass I have is negated. So if you ever look at, who the major bodybuilders are, they're not like really, really huge dudes. I mean, yeah, there's some that are an exception. Like when you look at like World's Strongest Man kind of thing, there you get some pretty behemoth guys, but they're also just absolute monsters of people. Like the Mountain from Game of Thrones. He's the current World's Strongest Man, and he's like 6'9", 450 pounds. I mean, dude's just an absolute monster of a human kind of thing. But to produce the most amount of power for body size, you want to be roughly about 5'7". That's going to give you the greatest amount of force generation with the smallest amount of distance traveled without losing too much strength due to a decrease in muscle mass size. When you get around like 5 foot tall, you're not going to have the same amount of muscle mass ability. So you won't have just the same muscle mass size to be able to put onto you. So you're going to suffer that way. If you're too tall, you're just too tall. The amount of muscle mass you have to put on needs to be much greater than typically what your height is. And then strength and flexibility. So this will be kind of more of the same here. So like I said, strength, just exerting force. This here, give examples in which lack of strength acts as a rate limiting constraint to performance of a skill. Okay. Rate limiting means that strength is going to be the reason you don't perform that skill. So what do you all think of can be, or what do you think of is an example of something where your lack of strength is going to limit your ability for a particular, skill? I mean, you're all softball people. It should be pretty easy for you.
Like swinging a bat.
Sure. Because how?
Because if you're too weak to pick it up or your bat's too heavy, you're not going to be able to like make contact with the ball, versus if you're strong enough to hold a bat at the right weight and length, then you're going to have more success. I mean, obviously there's other factors, but
Yeah, I get you there. I mean, think about when you all were in Little League. How did you treat the 4-hitter versus how you treated the 9-hitter? Because that's especially telling there, right? A 4-hitter in Little League is someone that's typically bigger, stronger, that whole thing, whereas your 9-hitter is typically not that great overall. Trying to think of a nice way to say it. I don't want to call them I don't want to call any names or anything, but I think of them as like that kind of skinny, wimpy kid kind of thing. I hope that's not too offensive, but
I don't think it is, because it's kind of cool when you think about like the number 9 hitter in Little League might be your D1 player in high school kind of a thing too. So that's like, I don't think it's offensive.
yeah, exactly. Once you pass through puberty, that's going to really determine a lot more for that. And then you look in college, even when you get to college, theoretically every single player in the lineup 1 through 9 should have the ability to, like, say, hit a home run. At least you would think so. But when you are younger, something like swinging a bat, throwing a ball, strength is going to be a very big limiter with that. You look at anything with, like, say, and Saad's not here, but you look at, like, say, basketball. Someone who has more strength in basketball at a younger age is going to be able to, say, play better defense, going to be able to jump higher, that kind of thing. All stuff that's going to give you quite a bit of an advantage over someone who isn't as strong as you. So strength is a huge thing, especially as it relates to your anaerobic based skills. Strength isn't nearly as important in aerobic based skills. Now, where something like this becomes like intertwined is when you look at, say, you're mixing both aerobic and anaerobic events. If you're like a soccer player, so if you're, say, like Michaela's a forward, I think, so she's like a striker. If with someone like her, she needs to be able to have endurance, both aerobic endurance and anaerobic power, to be able to not only run the potential length of the field, but also be able to kick the ball with power to score a goal, pass to a teammate, that kind of thing. Whenever you are assessing strength, the big thing that you're looking at here is really your muscle or joint movement. What's going to be a major limiter with strength is your soft tissue. So specifically like tendons and ligaments. Your tendons and ligaments are not strong enough to support the amount of force that your muscle can produce. If you were able to produce 100% MVIC, maximum voluntary isometric contraction, with a muscle, you would rip it clean off of the joint. So if I were to do a biceps curl right now, sometimes you just got to wake them up, right? I'm doing a biceps curl right now, and I used 100% of my biceps muscle, it would rip my biceps tendon straight off of the bone, because my muscle is so much more powerful than what my tendons and ligaments are. That's why when we talk about like in 250, we talked about how at best, you're only using around about 80% of your overall muscular force voluntarily. When you get a muscle cramp, you're at like 90 to 95%. And how do you feel when you get a cramp?
Awful.
Yeah, your body's not doing so great. That's when you're using that much of, or that high of a percentage of your muscle mass or your muscle strength, is when you get a cramp. That feels very bad. Use 100%, you have tetanus or lockjaw. Not a good thing. All these different assessments of strength, these are all pretty self-explanatory here. I've really talked about this. Once you hit puberty, when men get that, or boys get that jolt of testosterone, that's when strength becomes a big disparity. A post-pubescent male versus female at the same size, the male will always be stronger because they have a much higher amount of testosterone in their body. So girls, you are equal to men in terms of strength until puberty hits, and then it's never the same. Now, this also is going to mean that you're at the same training level or training ability. So obviously, like if a female were to do a whole lot of strength training and you took a comparable male who did no strength training, the female is going to be better because she's more well trained. You have to equal out that, and the only difference between there is the hormonal levels. So the hormones are what make men stronger than women. This can pretty much be your explanation for virtually everything in terms of strength, especially as it relates to motor development or development of a child through puberty. Everything from your T3, T4 hormones, so your thyroid hormones, your testosterone levels, your levels of cortisol, your levels of catecholamines, so your epinephrine, norepinephrine, all those are going to be relatively the same for everyone, minus testosterone. Testosterone is going to be the one that's a great, it's the game changer. Now, as you did learn from your last class, you can produce more force with a bigger muscle group. This is also, I mean, it just makes sense. I mean, when you talk about, say, squatting, you don't talk about, say, squatting 100 pounds as your max. You talk about 1,000 pounds being someone's max for squatting kind of thing. Whereas you look at like bicep curls, yeah, maybe someone can curl 100 pounds, maybe, but you're not really curling hundreds of pounds. You get into just the sheer size of your leg or your thigh, along, paired obviously with everything else. You'll always be able to squat more than you can curl. So when you look here, these are your leg lifts. These are your upper extremity lifts here. Elbow extension are these two there. Hand grip here. Everything is better for boys after you hit puberty. You look at here, everything's pretty much equal, right? I mean, yeah, girls are a little bit lower, but not statistically significant. There's no statistically significant changes there or differences there. Once you hit puberty, boom, you see how big of a difference that is. And again, pretty much all goes back to testosterone. Link between strength and maturation. Okay, so if I am stronger, that typically is going to mean I'm bigger. In terms of youth sports, though, where is this going to play the biggest role? So where does this matter the most?
Would it be depending on the age or just like any sport?
It's going to be more on the age, that's for sure. But what ages?
Over like 10, 11, 12-year-olds.
I would go probably a little bit older than that. So probably around your 12 to 14, 15-year-olds. And when you think about sports at that age, what are your major, or how big of a difference do you see between players in terms of strength and size?
A big difference.
Yeah, exactly. You know, this is why, like, say in Pop Warner football, they typically have weight categories as opposed to age categories. Because what happens if someone like me, who at 12 years old was roughly 6 foot, is playing against, you know, someone who's also 12 foot and, or 12 years old and is 5 foot tall? You know, they're going to stand no chance against me, or they're going to, you know, try to take out my ankles kind of thing and injure me kind of thing. That was one of the most annoying things when I played youth football, was like because, you know, there was none of this like concussion type stuff and, you know, don't hit anyone low, that kind of thing. So yeah, all the little guys would go like for my knees and stuff. And God, it just sucked to do that. But anyway, when you have any sort of big disparity in your physicality, it's going to have the biggest amount of disparity in performance. People who are smaller in like that little league, pony league-esque age range are going to be the ones performing typically the worst compared to their bigger counterparts, because they're lacking the size and strength to make up for it there. It isn't until you all reach your growth spurt that you can equalize. And that's why, like, someone like me, like, I absolutely dominated like the years 12 to 14 because I was just bigger than everyone. It wasn't until high school that I started running into people that were on my same, you know, skill level, because people had then caught up by then by hitting puberty. All right, so we've talked about all this already. Typically, when you're doing strength training with anyone that's a kid, you want to be focusing mostly on the movement patterns and building functional strength. You want to do the least amount of, say, targeted training. So I don't want to be doing, like, say, isolation-based exercises. I want to be doing broad-based exercises. So typically, like, your total body-based exercises are going to be the best for you there. If you have cardiovascular disease in adolescence, that's going to be something that's much more important to be monitoring for than just simply strength training. All right, and then flexibility. We talked a bit about flexibility in 250. Remember that with flexibility, this is just your range of motion. So that's all flexibility is just range of motion. Why is flexibility good for sports performance?
Just because it allows you to move like more freely almost.
what is my force equation?
Oh gosh, I don't
The
remember.
force equals what?
The force equals mass
Times
times acceleration. something like that.
acceleration. Yes. Mass, we don't really care about right now. So mass is going to stay the same on you as a person, no matter what. You're not going to change your mass, like say from pitch to pitch. Acceleration will change. Acceleration, when we look at, is going to be our speed over time. Gosh, I hope that's right.
I think it is.
Velocity over time, sorry. And there's your key there, is time. If I get a bigger range of motion, I have a longer amount of time to accelerate. The longer I can accelerate, overall, the greater my force production is going to be. The more force production I have, the better overall I'm going to perform typically. So let's say I'm throwing a ball. If I'm throwing a ball and I go from here to throw, how far or how hard can I throw it?
Not very hard and not very far.
Not really, yeah. But let's say I take the ball and I go all the way back and I wind up and throw all the way through. Now you see how longer distance leads to more acceleration. I can't have a longer distance if I can't get my arm back. So specifically what's important here is, say, your ability to get from max external rotation to max internal rotation. This is a huge range of motion disparity here. To be an elite level baseball pitcher, you need to get your max external rotation to about 90 degrees. If you measure mine right here, that's about maybe 20 degrees, right? Not very good. So you want to be able to get that arm to be all the way flat down. So I want this to be my external rotation. The more I have there, the more range of motion I have there, the greater distance I can travel, produce more force, throw a faster pitch. You think about, say, people that run obstacle courses. So have you ever seen the spider, was it the spider wall or the spider climb, something like that, from Ninja Warrior? Here we go. So this here.
Oh, yeah.
So what they have to do is they run up here. So there's a platform here. They have a trampoline there. They jump, and then they have to do a split and climb all the way through that to the other side, or else they fall in the water. Why is flexibility important there?
Because you gotta be able to reach both sides.
Exactly. Now, where this becomes problematic is what happens if you're really flexible but also really short. Someone like a Casey Catanzaro never was able to do that. What were you going to say, Gabby?
I was just gonna say, well, you're kind of just out of luck at that point.
Yeah, you're just too small. Doesn't matter how flexible you are. Flexibility is good to a point. Flexibility is bad when it becomes hypo or hyper. If I have hypo flexibility, that's like when I throw, I can't get all the way to the amount of external rotation I need to. Hypo flexibility, not good. Hyper flexibility is also a problem. Why? So let's say I can get back to my max external rotation and I went to like say 110 degrees. So now my arm,
You're like dislocating it almost, or you are.
you're on the right track there. You're going to create instability at the joint if you go past what your normal range of motion is, or normal end range of motion is. Now, every one of you, unless you had a disease that caused you to have, like, say, chronic dislocations, every one of you could become a contortionist if you just worked hard enough at it. So if you all just devoted yourself to stretching and flexibility, it would take you a couple years, but you could do it. Every one of you could become a contortionist if you really wanted to. So hopefully challenge accepted. No, but if you do that, you create instability in your joints. I always talked about in kinesiology, this continuum we have here between stability and mobility. The more mobile you are, the less stable you are. So if you have hypermobility, imagine how unstable that is. If you have, like, say, an owl who can turn their head completely around, what do you think would happen if their head was facing backwards and I jerked it forward?
If your head was where?
So if my head was spun completely backwards, like my chest is facing you, but my head is behind me, like literally 180 degrees facing the other way. And then all of a sudden, I just took your head and I jerked it forward in that position. What do you think would happen?
Would it hurt? Would it break? I mean,
Most likely,
depending on how much
I would most
pressure, I guess,
likely,
you put.
yeah, I would most likely snap your neck is what would happen. Because when you have that amount of mobility, your stability is virtually non-existent. So that's why, like, someone that you see doing the contortionist kind of stuff, like I think of the person that, like, say, does the back bend and shoots an arrow out underneath their legs kind of thing. You know what I'm talking about?
Mm-hmm.
If you were to, like, say, like, kick them in the back, you could pretty much end their life. You're not at all safe in that position because you have an inherent lack of stability there. So you see how everything is good when it stays in that normal range. Now, girls are typically always going to be more flexible than boys. Why?
Did you say girls are going to be more flexible than boys? Oh, yeah, sorry, that's what the screen says. I don't know, because I'm not. I got to stretch every day because my body hurts, so I don't know what it's like to be flexible, I guess.
It's all because of these guys right here.
Makes sense.
Muscle mass is going to limit range of motion. The only reason why my elbow flexion stops here is because my forearm runs into my biceps. Men have greater amounts of testosterone, greater muscle mass, limited flexibility. The bigger your muscles get, the worse your flexibility gets. That's why you see someone that's a huge bodybuilder, they can barely move because their muscles are so big. Women, on the other hand, tend to have smaller muscle mass. So in general, I know Gabby's the exception here, but women in general are going to be more flexible because they lack the same muscle mass. So that muscle mass is not impeding on your range of motion. You can pretty much maintain all of your flexibility if you just keep stretching. Muscle mass will decrease with age. That's a given. But flexibility can stay pretty much the same or unchanged if you just keep doing it. So you can be 90 years old and still do a split, but if you quit doing it, you're going to lose that real quick.
Does like weight or anything have to do with you being flexible, or is it just like the amount of like stretching and stuff?
Yes and no. The heavier you are, and also depending on where exactly that weight is dispersed, is going to play a bit of a role. So like if you had like say a huge gut, it's going to prevent you from like say being able to do forward trunk flexion a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But for the most part, no, it's not going to change that. It just may change your ability to get into certain positions.
Oh, okay.
But you also want to think of, say, being fat or putting on excessive weight the same way you would with putting on muscle mass. In terms of flexibility, the bigger you are, the more it's going to limit range of motion depending on where it is.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
But you also look at like say you have, really big arms, but they're flabby. Well, if I bend my arm, my forearm will actually compress that down. So it doesn't make as big of a difference with that because fat is going to be compressible a lot easier than muscle is. And you can even do it for yourself. Like if you even just like extend your arm outward and try to squeeze down your bicep, you'll feel that there's only a little bit of give. Whereas if you grab your gut and squeeze that, you can compress that into all different shapes and sizes, So strength, good. Flexibility, good. Too much flexibility, not good. Girls more flexible than boys. Muscle mass equals reduced flexibility. Yeah, that's about it. So yeah, what kind of questions do you all have on this? If you learned nothing else about building exercise programs for youth, and you just heard today's lecture, what you should remember is that you want to get all children stretching. All children should have a good flexibility regimen. Strength training is important, but you have to recognize what type of strength training you're doing. Bodyweight exercises are going to be superior to isolated exercises because those are the ones that are going to target the most amount of muscles and cause you to have the most amount of proprioceptive gains and the most amount of core strength gains, teaching you the most amount of fundamental movements. Aerobic endurance is going to be at its best after puberty. Your best thing to do with aerobic-based exercises is to insert them into opportunities for play. No one wants to go out and run a mile, but how about, do you guys want to go and just play soccer for a while?
Yes.
There you go. Aerobic activity should be purposeful type play. Strength activity, while you can use components of play on there, like especially like if you're doing climbing exercises, if you're doing things like say using an overhead ladder, all of those are going to be really good and really good examples of how you can use play to be productive in terms of strength training without saying, okay, go and lift 50 pounds of whatever, do bench press, or do push-ups, do crunches. The more functional you can make it, and the more you can get that type of exercise back to something where it involves playing, the better it's going to be for you, or the better adaptive it's going to be for your younger athlete. That kind of makes sense?
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, so that is everything new I have for you there. So thank you for getting through that with me. I will have a video posted here, not only of this class today, but also for your assignment overview. And then I will also post your lab assignment in the announcement section. So look for that here shortly. And if you guys have any questions, I will stick around until you all leave. If not, I will see you all on Wednesday.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.